Okay, so, ready to dive into a sermon?
A sermon?
Yeah, you heard right. Stick with me on this one.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
We're looking at one from last week, Central Baptist Church in Crockett, Texas.
Crockett, Texas, huh?
Yep. And get this, the pastor uses Romeo and Juliet, the movie, the 1996 one, with DiCaprio, as a starting point for talking about peacemaking.
Wow, that's an interesting combo. Shakespeare and sermons?
Right, you wouldn't think they'd go together, but it actually works. He even quotes Tybalt. Remember that line?
Don't refresh my memory.
Peace. I hate the word as I hate hell, all Montagues and thee.
Dramatic,
It's
right?
definitely dramatic.
And pretty intense.
Exactly. And the pastor uses that to show how deep that resistance to peace can be. Like, it's almost like a reflex for some people.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like choosing conflict is easier or more familiar than actually trying to make peace.
Right. And he talks about how we do that all the time without even realizing it. And then he gets into this whole idea of like what true peace actually is. He says it's not just the absence of conflict, but it's about like harmony and right relationships.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm following. So it's not just about keeping things quiet. It's about actually having uh, healthy and just relationships.
Exactly. He calls that kind of surface level peace Pax Romana, the Roman peace.
Pax Romana, like the peace that Rome enforced through military might.
Yeah, exactly. And he says that's not real peace. It's just forced order. It's like, when a kid is quiet because they're scared of being punished, not because they actually feel peaceful.
That's a good analogy. Makes you think about how much of the peace we see in the world today is actually just enforced silence.
Right. And it makes you wonder, like, what are we willing to sacrifice in the name of keeping things calm? Is it always worth it?
Yeah, I mean, are we just sweeping problems under the rug instead of actually addressing them?
Exactly. And the pastor brings up some biblical examples to illustrate this. He talks about Jesus's trial and the arrest of Peter and John.
Oh, interesting. What does he say about those?
Well, he points out that in both cases, the Jewish leaders seemed more concerned with keeping things quiet to avoid trouble with the Romans than with making sure justice was done.
Ah, so it's that tension between keeping the peace and actually doing what's right, even if it might cause some upheaval.
Right. And it makes you think about, like, where do we see that happening today? Are there situations where we're prioritizing order over justice, maybe without even realizing it?
Hmm. Yeah, that's something to ponder.
It is. And this is where things get really interesting. The pastor lays out these 5, like, practical steps to becoming a peacemaker.
Okay, I'm all ears.
All right. So step 1, and this one really hit me. Take the initiative.
Take the initiative. What does that mean?
It means don't wait for the other person to make the first move. Be the one to reach out. Be the one to extend the olive branch, even if you don't think you're the one who should have to. He uses the story of Jesus seeking out Peter after Peter denied him.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Jesus could have easily just waited for Peter to come crawling back, but he chose to reach out first.
Exactly. And that's like such a powerful example of leading by example. It's about putting your ego aside and saying, okay, I'm going to do what it takes to restore this relationship, even if it's hard.
That's a good one. All right, so what's step 2?
Step 2 is act in humility.
Humility, huh? Okay, how do you do that in a conflict?
Well, the pastor says it's about putting your pride and ego aside and really focusing on understanding the other person's perspective, like really trying to see things from their point of view, even if you don't agree with them.
That could be tough, though, right? Especially when you feel like you're in the right.
It is tough, but it's essential for peacemaking. It's about recognizing that you don't have all the answers, that you might be wrong, and that the other person's feelings and experiences are just as valid as yours.
Okay, humility, check. What's next?
Step 3, act in love.
Act in love. Okay, that sounds nice. But how do you do that when you're feeling anything but loving towards the other person?
Well, the pastor emphasizes that genuine peace has to come from a place of love, not fear or obligation. And he uses the story of Jacob and Esau to illustrate this.
Jacob and Esau, the twins from the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. And they had a pretty messed up relationship. Jacob tricked Esau out of his birthright, and there was a lot of bitterness and resentment there.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly. So how did they find peace?
Well, eventually they had this really powerful reconciliation, and it was all because of Esau's love for Jacob. His love was so strong that it overcame all those years of anger and hurt.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. So it's about choosing love, even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it.
Exactly. And that's what the pastor is saying. True peacemaking has to be rooted in love. All right, ready for step 4.
Get with it.
Step 4 is forgiveness.
Forgiveness. That's a big one.
Yeah, it is. And the pastor doesn't sugarcoat it. He says it's a choice that's going to involve pain either way. You can choose to hold on to bitterness and resentment, which obviously hurts, or you can choose to forgive.
Which is also really hard.
Exactly. But ultimately, forgiveness leads to deeper peace and healing. And it's not about saying what happened was okay. It's about releasing yourself from that grip of anger and resentment.
Yeah, it's like you're carrying around this heavy weight,
Yeah.
and forgiveness is like finally putting it down.
Exactly. Okay, ready for the last step.
Lay it on me.
Step 5 is this. Do your part, and then trust God to do the rest.
Do your part, trust God. I like that.
Yeah.
It's simple, but profound.
Right. It's acknowledging that we can only control our own actions. We can offer peace, we can extend forgiveness, but we can't force the other person to accept it. We have to surrender the outcome and trust that God is working, even in the midst of the mess.
So it's about letting go of that need to control everything and just having faith that things will work out in the end.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is that the pastor points out that God has already done all these steps towards peacemaking with us.
He has. How so?
He initiated, he humbled himself, he acted in love, and he offered forgiveness. All that's left is for us to accept it.
Wow. That's pretty humbling.
It really is. It flips the script on how we usually think about our relationship with God.
It does. So we're not the ones initiating peace with God. He's already initiated it with us.
Yeah,
And now we just have to respond.
exactly. And that's the challenge, right? To take what God has done for us and let it transform how we interact with others, to become peacemakers ourselves.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. True peace versus Pax Romana, biblical examples. Those 5 steps to peacemaking.
I know, right? And before we move on, I want to pause and ask you, what stands out to you the most? Like, where do you see, like, the biggest challenges to peacemaking? In your own life, I mean.
That's a good question. I think for me, it's often those little things those little annoyances that we let kind of fester.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Like when you let that little thing like build up and build up instead of just, addressing it right away.
Right. And then before you know it, it's this huge issue, and it's like 10 times harder to deal with.
It's so true. And it's funny, right? We're talking about Romeo and Juliet, this big epic tragedy, but the pastor's using it to talk about like everyday peacemaking. It's like those big conflicts, they often start with those small things.
Yeah. And those feuding families, the Montagues and Capulets, they're not so different from us, are they? We all get caught up in our own perspectives, our own little worlds.
It's easy to forget that everyone is like fighting their own battles, you know?
Yeah. And that's where empathy comes in, I think. That ability to step outside of ourselves and try to see things from the other person's point of view.
Empathy. Yeah. That seems like a key ingredient in all those 5 steps the pastor talked about, right? Like taking the initiative, acting in humility, acting in love, forgiveness. It all comes back to empathy.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing the humanity of the other person, even when they're driving you crazy.
So true. But it's not always easy, is it? Like putting your own ego aside, especially when you feel like you've been wronged.
Oh, it's definitely not easy. It takes practice. It's like learning a new language or a new instrument. You're gonna hit some sour notes along the way.
But the more you practice, the better you get at it. So it's not about being like a perfect peacemaker all the time. It's about striving to be more peaceable in general.
Exactly. It's a journey, not a destination.
I like that, a journey. And it makes me wonder if maybe conflict isn't always a bad thing. Maybe it's an opportunity for us to learn and grow.
Ooh, that's an interesting thought. Like maybe conflict can actually bring us closer together if we approach it the right way.
Right. Instead of seeing it as something to avoid at all costs, maybe we can see it as a chance to deepen our understanding of ourselves and each other.
It's like those what are they called? Those Japanese bowls, the ones they repair with gold.
Kintsugi.
Yes, kintsugi. It's like the cracks and imperfections, they're not hidden, they're highlighted, they become part of the beauty of the piece.
That's such a beautiful analogy. So maybe it's not about like pretending that we're perfect or that our relationships are perfect. It's about embracing the brokenness and finding the beauty in it.
And finding the strength in it too. Like those repair bowls, they're actually stronger in the places where they were broken.
Wow. So maybe going through conflict, going through those hard times, it can actually make us stronger, more resilient.
I think so. As long as we're willing to do the work to to put in the effort to heal and rebuild.
So maybe it's not about avoiding conflict altogether. It's about learning how to navigate it in a way that leads to growth and healing.
Exactly. It's about choosing peace, even when it's hard, even when it's messy.
Okay, so as we wrap up this part of our dive, let's bring those 5 steps back into focus for our listener. And maybe this time, instead of just, listing them off, we can each share a personal reflection on one step that really speaks to us. What do you think?
I love that idea. You go first. Which one resonates with you the most?
That's tough. They're also important, but I think the one that's been on my mind a lot lately is acting in humility. It's so easy to get defensive,
Yeah.
especially when I feel like I'm in the right. But I'm realizing that true peacemaking requires me to put my ego aside and really listen to the other person's perspective, even when it's hard to hear.
That's so true. Yeah. It's about recognizing that we don't have all the answers,
Yeah.
and that sometimes we need to be willing to let go of our own need to be right.
Yeah, exactly. What about you? Which step speaks to you the most right now?
For me, it's forgiveness. It's something I've struggled with a lot in my life, but I've also seen the incredible power it has to heal and transform. It's not easy, but it's so worth it.
It's like forgiveness is the key that unlocks the door to true peace.
I think so. And
No,
and it's not just about forgiving others, it's about forgiving ourselves too.
that's a good point. We often forget about that part. We can be so hard on ourselves.
We can, but it's important to remember that we're all human, we all make mistakes,
Yeah,
and we all deserve forgiveness.
I love that. And it makes me think about how interconnected all those 5 steps are, right? Like humility leads to forgiveness, forgiveness leads to deeper connection, and it all builds on itself.
It's like a beautiful spiral upward and onward towards peace.
I like that. A spiral towards peace, and it's a journey that we're all on together.
We are. And even if we stumble, even if we fall, we can always get back up and keep going.
Because that's what grace is all about, right? Second chances, new beginnings.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole journey so hopeful.
I think that's a perfect place to pause for now. But before we wrap things up completely, I want to get your thoughts on this whole idea of finding like peacemaking advice in a sermon. It's pretty unexpected, right? I mean, who would have thought?
Yeah, it really shows you can find these hidden gems in the most surprising places.
Right. It's like you can deep dive into anything and find something valuable if you look
Yeah.
closely enough. And this sermon, I mean, using Romeo and Juliet, that's pretty creative.
It is. And it just goes to show like the power of storytelling. No matter where it comes from, a Shakespeare play or a pastor in Texas, it's those stories that really connect with us.
They do. And this sermon has definitely given us a lot to think about. What about for our listener? Where do you see those opportunities for peacemaking popping up like in everyday life?
Well, I think it starts with paying attention. Like tuning into those little moments where things start to feel tense or off.
Yeah, like those little red flags.
Exactly. Like maybe it's a tense silence at the dinner table or a passive-aggressive email from a coworker.
Oh, I know those emails. But it's about catching those moments early, right? Before they turn into something bigger.
Right. And then it's about making a conscious choice to approach those situations with a spirit of peace.
So it's not about like avoiding conflict altogether. It's about choosing how we respond to it.
Exactly. It's about setting healthy boundaries, but still being open to understanding the other person's perspective.
It's a delicate balance for sure.
It is, but it's worth striving for.
It is. It's like tending a garden. Like you have to weed out the negative stuff, the resentment and bitterness, and then you can nurture the good stuff, the kindness and compassion.
That's a great analogy. And just like a garden, it takes time and effort to cultivate peace.
It does. It's a process, not a one-time event.
Right. It's a way of life. It's about making those daily choices to choose peace even when it's hard.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with this. Remember those 5 steps the pastor talked about. Take the initiative, act in humility, act in love, forgive, and trust God.
Such powerful steps. And they're not just for big conflicts. They're for those everyday moments too.
They are, and the more we practice them, the more natural they become. Like peacemaking becomes a habit, a way of being in the world.
And who knows, maybe our small acts of peacemaking will inspire others to do the same.
Yeah, maybe we can start a ripple effect.
A ripple effect of peace. I love that.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive, and I hope our listener is walking away with a sense of hope, a
Hmm.
sense that peace is possible, even in a world that often feels so divided.
I hope so too. And remember, listener, peace starts with each of us. It starts with those small choices we make every day to be kind, to be compassionate, to be forgiving.
So go out there and be peacemakers. You never know what kind of impact you might have.